Okay, so we're going to practice listening to the sentences that we completed aloud together. I want you to hear for each sentence, I want you to hear is it could or should? And the ones that you did on your own, you can check and see did I get this correct? So I'm going to play for you this practice. So we just need to listen now.
Page 86, Exercise 2A. 1.
My rent is going up again. What should I do?
Here's my advice. You're a good tenant. I think you should talk to your landlord.
2.
I have to fix my credit. What should I do?
You should talk to a debt counselor. He can help you.
3.
Can you suggest a nice restaurant? It's my wife's birthday.
You could try Chow's. Or how about Anita's?
4.
It's my niece's 16th birthday next week. What could I get her?
Why don't you get tickets to a concert? Or you could buy her a CD.
5.
That vocational school is very expensive. I can't afford it. Can you give me any advice?
Well, you're a good student. I think you should apply for a scholarship.
6.
I need a new car. Where do you suggest I look for one?
How about looking in the newspaper? Or you could look online.
7.
I just got another parking ticket. It's getting harder and harder to park in this neighborhood.
I think you should sell that car. You don't really need it.
8.
I'm going to be in New York City in July. Any ideas for things to do?
Well, you could see a show on Broadway. Or you could walk in Central Park. Or you could go to an art museum. There are so many things to do.
Okay, so this is some useful language that was in this practice. So when you're making suggestions, when you're saying could, right? You're making suggestions. You can say, why don't you? Why don't you try this, right? Why don't you go for a walk, right? These are suggestions. How about? Right? How about? So how about with the noun? So how about the new restaurant? How about the new restaurant down the street, right? And then how about with a verb? How about walking, right? How about swimming? Someone says, I don't like exercise, right? How about swimming? Or how about dancing? So these are just ideas of ways that you could use language, useful language, when you're making suggestions. Why don't you? Why don't you try this? Why don't you get your books out? Why don't you get your toys out, right? When your children say, I'm bored, right? Instead of, watch TV, you could say, why don't you draw me a picture, right? So we have why don't you, and then we have the verb. And then how about? And then how about with the verb. So just some ideas for you.
Page 86.
Okay, so now we're going to do a little bit more practice and practice with speaking. So there are different problems here, and we're going to make suggestions or give advice. Okay, and that's going to be up to us. all right? But we're going to look to see, are these problems so big that maybe they do need advice? So let's look at the example, and that's also number 1. And you can see there's a picture for each one of these. Number 1 says, my car broke down. Okay, so you could give advice here, or you could offer some suggestions. In this example, there are suggestions offered. You could take the bus, or you could ask someone for a ride. Okay, so notice when there are suggestions, there's usually 2 or more sometimes. Okay, so number 1, you could take the bus, or you could ask someone for a ride. Okay. What if it was advice? How could you offer advice or give advice? You should buy a new car, right? You should get a new car. You should sell that old car of yours, right? You should. But for this one, we're using could. Okay. What about number 2? My rent is going up $150. My rent is going up $150. So this one you could offer advice. You could give advice. You could say, you should talk to your landlord, right? Or you should move, right? So this one you could give advice. What about number 3? It's getting cold in here. What would you say? It's getting cold in here. I think I would offer suggestions or make suggestions like, you could put on a sweater, right? Or you could turn the heat up. You could get a blanket. Those are some suggestions. You could. What about number 4? I can't afford a new washing machine. I can't afford a new washing machine. I think you could say you could buy a used one. Right? You could buy a used one. Is there any other advice? You could look for sales. You could shop around, go to different shops, or look online. You could look online for sales. Okay, what about number 5? These shoes look terrible. Right? There's holes in them. They're very old. You should buy new ones. You could give advice, right? You should buy new ones. Or you could get new ones, right? You could buy new ones. Or you could have them fixed. So really, for any of these, you could offer advice, give advice like you should, or you can give suggestions. Okay, what about number 6? I don't have enough cash to pay for these groceries. Ooh, I don't have enough cash. So I would maybe give a suggestion like, you could put some things back, right? You could put some things back. You could call a friend and ask to borrow money. You could call a friend or your husband and ask for some money. Okay, number 7, I got a bad haircut. You could make suggestions like, you could call the hairstylist and let them know. You could try to fix it yourself, or you should go to a different person, right? You should go to a different hairdresser. You could give advice. You should wear a hat. Okay, number 8, my neighbors are really noisy. So this is up to you. You can offer suggestions like, you could call your landlord, right? Or you could call your neighbors. You might not want to do that. Or you could call the police, or you should call the police, right? So this is just depending on whether you want to make a suggestion or give advice and be more strong with your advice. Okay, here are some examples of people, just like we have friends and family, who might need some help, right? They might need some of your help, right? So we're going to make suggestions or we're going to give advice. So what I want you to do, this is your time to practice speaking. Okay, so this is the first example. Helene spends too much money on food. What would you tell Helene? What would you tell her? You should, or you could, or how about, or why don't you, right? I'll give a quick example. Why don't you go to the farmer's market? Right? Or why don't you look for sales? So you could give some suggestions. This is another one. Gregory spends too much money on clothes. What could you say to Gregory? Teresa spends too much money on rent. What would you say to Teresa? Yusuf spends too much money on his cell phone plan. Melinda spends too much money on her car payments. So for these, there are 5. What I'd like you to do is in your notebooks, write down some suggestions or advice that you would give to these people that have some problems. Okay? You can use could or should. This is up to you. You can use why don't you if you're giving a suggestion. So decide what you'd like to do, but you are offering suggestions. You are giving advice. You will have 5 sentences, maybe more if you have more advice. But just like I said for Helene, Helene spends too much money on food. You could say, you could try going to the farmer's market, or you could try going to Namdaemun. Or you could shop for less, right? Or you should go, right? You should go to Walmart. You can offer advice as well. Okay, so I want you to spend a few minutes. This is practice for you with writing, but also practice with communicating, because I'd like you to be able to practice speaking these as well. One option, if you would like, you can record yourself on your phone and you can send it to me on WhatsApp. You can make a quick little recording, right? Helene spends too much money on food. You could say to Helene, Helene, you should shop at Walmart, right? So you can offer some advice. You can send it to me on recording. You can also write it in your notebook and send it to me in a photo to WhatsApp. But I would like to see or hear some of this communication, okay? Some of your advice or your suggestions.